If you've ever wondered where exactly the intersection of spiritual sight and spiritual therapy could be, this is the video for you. I have been someone who has seen in the spiritual realm since I was the age of 3. Jesus showed up in my backyard and opened my eyes to a lot of things. And since then, I have seen openly, I have seen inside my mind's eye, I have seen in dreams, I have seen in many different ways. And I have also been someone who has gone to quite a bit of therapy at this point in my life. And there's a lot of discussion on the internet about people who see spiritually and the differences between seeing spiritually and having a mental disorder, which I don't think is something that should cause shame. Disordered thinking is disordered thinking. And if you have disordered thinking, let's get it put back in order. I think that a lot of times words like psychosis are used to shame and silence people that maybe need help getting their thought lives back in order. But when we start seeing a lot of stories online about people who are seeing spiritually, having dreams, having visions, how do we even talk about the differences between spiritual sight and having disordered thinking? Well, a lot of people that have strong opinions on this, if you ask me, they seem to be doing a whole lot of black and white splitting mentally on their opinions of what people who see should do about their seeing. And that is also a sign of disordered thinking, is having very strong black and white splitting thinking. I'll just throw that out there and leave that there for them who need it. But while I'll grant you that therapy is a rather new phenomenon, and if you look back on human history, we did not have therapists until maybe 100 years ago, maybe a little bit more. But as a seer, I am grateful to live in an era of mental health care. And I believe, as someone who sees, that your mental health matters and also needs to be looked after, because there's a huge difference between having a spiritual experience and having an experience of disordered thinking. And as a seer, I don't think that you have to pick one route or the other. Either I'm going to have this spiritual experience, or I'm just going to call myself crazy. A 1992 article titled "Towards a More Culturally Sensitive DSM-IV, Psycho-Religious and Psycho-Spiritual Problems" states the following. In theory, research, and practice, mental health professionals have tended to ignore or pathologize the religious and spiritual dimensions of life. This represents a type of cultural insensitivity towards individuals who have religious and spiritual experiences in both Western and non-Western cultures. After documenting the religiosity gap between clinicians and patients, the authors review the role of theory, inadequate training, and biological primacy in fostering psychiatry's insensitivity. They then go on to discuss how you should have a little bit more leeway, and then they said that they want to give a different diagnostic category. It would improve diagnostic assessments when religious and spiritual issues are involved, and reduce harm from misdiagnosis of psycho-religious and psycho-spiritual problems, improve treatment of such problems by stimulating clinical research, and encourage clinical training centers to address the religious and spiritual dimensions of spiritual existence. Now, I am not a licensed counselor. I have a master's degree in divinity, which included some training on spiritual and emotional health and included some training on pastoral counseling. But as someone who has experienced this as a seer, if I am experiencing anxiety, depression, or disordered thinking that is disrupting my life, that is a red flag to me that I am not healthy enough to be engaging spiritually. And I would encourage you that if you are feeling afraid, frightened, anxious, depressed, you may have what these researchers are calling a clinical religious problem. And if you are having that kind of problem and you are not at peace, look, if I'm not at peace, I can't discern or think clearly enough to avoid being deceived. Galatians 5 talks about that the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And if you are having an experience that is causing you to not have that fruit, you need to consider that you may be having a psychological or spiritual issue. It doesn't mean that it's not real or that it doesn't correlate to the spiritual realm, but you need to be able to be firm, calm, and grounded. And for me, if I'm not in that place, I need to return to basics that are not so basic, like being ridiculously, outrageously, and unconditionally loved by Jesus and at rest in that. And I also need to examine the cause and root of my disordered thinking. Therapy, regular mental health checkups, and inner healing have proved a wonderful loosening of inner knots, as well as a third party who can help me navigate how clearly I'm thinking about issues. I have never been diagnosed with psychosis or anything in that category, but I have been in a lot of therapy because I see the value in having somebody help you think about how you're thinking. I'm not too proud and I am not too good for that. And while therapy has not saved my life, it has helped me to focus my vision. I would encourage you to seek out clinicians and therapists who understand that there is a difference between a mental health issue and a religious, psycho-spiritual, because a lot of people aren't able to distinguish between the two. And if you're a seer, I say you should be taking care of your mental health much more rigorously than your average person. But you should also be finding a reputable therapist who will not impose their own views, training, or opinions over your faith either. It can take a lot to find a therapist with boundaries. There are a few on my site under the resources. There's no email, there's no sign up, just links to some good help, and you can check those out there. But I want to leave you with this verse from Mark 6:34, for they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Jesus wants to teach you things about your mind, about your heart, and about your spirit and emotions. Don't let fear, including the fear of what people think, hold you back from either help or from seeing spiritually and living a full, vast human experience that doesn't cut you out from the spiritual realm. Hey there, I'm Mary. I have spent the last 30 years of my life looking in the spiritual realm for insight, but Jesus is still the only face that I recognize. I write and teach on the spiritual realm and recognizing Jesus in a crowd. I have more writing, speaking, and a podcast at marriedfortheagents.com and on most apps at marriedfortheagents.com. If you enjoyed this though, grab the subscribe button because there's a lot more free stuff where that came from. But we also have a community of folks who are working towards being healthy and whole and living full expression-filled lives while also staying grounded. If that's something that interests you, there's a free link below. But for now, I hope that this brought clarity, peace, and comfort to you.